The stagecoach rattled along the final stretch of dusty road, its wheels churning through the golden plains of Wyoming territory. Amelia Hayes gripped the leather strap hanging from the ceiling, steadying herself as the vehicle jolted over another rut. 28 hours of travel had left her exhausted, but the anticipation of what awaited kept her wide awake. "Hawks Valley coming up," the driver called from above, his voice barely audible over the creak of wood and jangle of tack. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Amelia smoothed her dark green traveling dress, her finest garment, saved for this very occasion, and touched the simple gold locket at her throat. Inside lay a tiny photograph of her parents, both gone now, victims of the influenza that had swept through Boston 3 years earlier. "First time out west, miss?" An elderly woman sitting opposite Amelia smiled kindly, her face mapped with the fine lines of a life well lived. "Yes, ma'am." Amelia returned the smile, though her stomach churned with nerves. "My fiancé awaits me in Hawks Valley." "Fiancé, is it? Lucky young man." The woman's eyes twinkled with interest. Fiancé. The word still felt foreign on Amelia's tongue. Thomas Blackwell, successful cattle rancher, town council member, and the man whose letters had promised her a fresh start, far from the crowded, unforgiving streets of Boston. 6 months of correspondence, each letter more promising than the last. A man of principle and ambition, he'd written. A man seeking an educated companion to share his life and help build his legacy in this promising territory. What Thomas didn't know, what Amelia had carefully omitted from her letters, was that she'd been dismissed from her position as a schoolteacher for challenging the headmaster's outdated curriculum. Too headstrong, he'd called her, too opinionated for a young lady entrusted with impressionable minds. With her parents gone and her reputation in educational circles tarnished, Amelia had found herself with dwindling options. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like providence. Respected rancher seeks educated bride of good character, must appreciate literature, conversation, and frontier living. Age 28 and 35 preferred. Amelia was only 26, but she'd been honest about everything else. Her education at the Women's College of Boston, her teaching experience, her love of literature and philosophy. She'd even enclosed a photograph, something many women avoided when responding to such advertisements. Thomas's reply had come swiftly, full of appreciation for her candor and education. Their correspondence had flourished, his letters revealing a man of surprising depth and intelligence for a frontier rancher. He'd written of his dreams for Wyoming territory, of the library he was building in his home, of his belief that the West needed women of substance and education to truly flourish. Now, as the stagecoach crested a final hill, Amelia caught her. First glimpse of Hawks Valley, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a verdant valley, surrounded by rolling grasslands and distant purple mountains. Her future home. "Almost there, folks," the driver called. "Hold tight for the descent." The stagecoach lurched forward, beginning its winding path down to the valley floor. Amelia drew a deep breath, touching her locket once more for courage. Everything she owned was packed in the 2 trunks, strapped to the coach's roof and the carpet bag at her feet. Her entire life condensed to what she could carry across a continent. "You seem nervous, dear," the elderly woman observed. "Just eager," Amelia replied, trying to convince herself as much as her travel companion. "A new chapter begins." The woman patted Amelia's hand. "The West changes people, sometimes for better, sometimes not, but it always reveals who they truly are." The words lingered in Amelia's mind as the stagecoach rolled into town, wheels clattering against the hard-packed dirt of Hawks Valley's main street. It was late afternoon, and the settlement was alive with activity. Men in dusty work clothes moved between businesses, A group of children chased a hoop down a side street, and women in practical frontier dresses carried parcels from the general store. The stagecoach came to a halt before a wooden building with Hawks Valley Stage and Post painted in neat letters across its facade. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Thomas had promised to meet her arrival. "End of the line, folks," the driver announced, jumping down to open the door. Amelia allowed the elderly woman to exit first, then gathered her carpet bag and stepped down into the dusty street. The late summer sun beat down, warmer than she was accustomed to back east. She scanned the small crowd that had gathered to meet the stage, searching for a face that matched the description Thomas had provided: tall, broad-shouldered, with light brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Miss Hayes?" Amelia turned toward the voice. A man approached, handsome, well-dressed in a tailored suit that set him apart from the more roughly clothed men nearby. He matched Thomas's description perfectly, his confident stride and easy smile suggesting a man accustomed to respect and authority. "Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, though she was certain of his identity. "Indeed." He smiled, revealing perfect teeth beneath his neat mustache. "Welcome to Hawks Valley." He looked her over briefly, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "As comfortable as such a journey can be," Amelia replied honestly. "I'm grateful to have arrived safely." Thomas nodded, then gestured to a young boy loitering nearby. "Jimmy, fetch Miss Hayes's trunks from the stage and bring them to my wagon." He turned back to Amelia. "I thought perhaps you might appreciate some refreshment before we head to the ranch. The journey must have left you parched." "That would be most welcome, thank you." Amelia smiled, relieved by his thoughtfulness. Thomas offered his arm, which she took, and led her across the street to a small restaurant attached to the town's hotel. Inside, it was cool and relatively quiet, with only a few patrons scattered among the tables. "Ah, Mr. Blackwell." The proprietor hurried forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "Your usual table is ready, sir." Thomas guided Amelia to a corner table, waiting until she was seated before taking his own chair. A waitress quickly brought water and coffee without being asked, clearly familiar with Thomas's preferences. "The special for the lady," Thomas told the waitress. "And my usual." When they were alone, Thomas studied Amelia with greater care, his gaze analytical rather than warm. "You're younger than I expected," he remarked. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mentioned I was 26 in my second letter," she said carefully. "Did you? Perhaps I misremembered." He sipped his water. "No matter. You're as lovely as your photograph suggested." "Thank you," Amelia replied, uncertain how to respond to the clinical nature of his compliment. "Your letters described the beauty of this territory, but they hardly did it justice. The landscape is breathtaking." "It's a land of opportunity," Thomas agreed, his expression brightening with genuine enthusiasm. "Wyoming will achieve statehood within our lifetime, mark my words. Those of us here now, building civilization from wilderness, we're laying the foundation for greatness." This was the Thomas she had come to know through his letters. Passionate, visionary, articulate, Amelia felt herself relax slightly. Perhaps his initial reserve was simply the awkwardness of their first meeting. "I've been preparing the ranch house for your arrival," he continued. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, has aired out the east bedroom for you until the wedding." Amelia nodded, taking a sip of water to hide her sudden nervousness at the mention of their impending marriage. "When do you envision the ceremony taking place?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Pastor Mills can perform the service this Sunday," Thomas replied matter-of-factly. "I've already spoken with him. Nothing elaborate, of course, but respectable. The ladies of the town have been quite curious about my mail-order bride." The phrase struck Amelia like a physical blow. Mail-order bride. Was that how he viewed her? How does the town view her? In her mind, they were two educated people who had formed a connection through thoughtful correspondence and decided to build a life together. "I see," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I had thought perhaps we might take some time to become better acquainted in person before proceeding with the wedding." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've traveled over 1,000 miles to marry me, Miss Hayes. Having second thoughts already?" "Not at all," Amelia assured him quickly. "I simply thought—" "My ranch is 15 miles from town," Thomas interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "It would be improper for you to stay there unwed for any significant period. Think of your reputation and mine." Of course, he was right. Amelia knew the social constraints as well as anyone. Still, something in his assumption of control, however reasonable, pricked at her independence. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Amelia used the interruption to gather her thoughts. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. She realized suddenly how hungry she was after the long journey. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Tell me, Miss Hayes," Thomas said after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes, "what do you think of the women's suffrage movement that's gaining such attention back east?" The question surprised her. "I believe strongly in a woman's right to vote," she answered honestly. "Education and enfranchisement go hand in hand. One cannot truly educate half the population while denying them a voice in their governance." Thomas's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "A progressive view." "Wyoming Territory has already granted women the vote, has it not?" Amelia countered. "That suggests a progressive spirit here that I find admirable. A political necessity, more than a moral position," Thomas clarified. "We need to attract more women to the territory for it to thrive. But a woman's true influence should be exercised in the home, don't you agree? Shaping the next generation, supporting her husband's endeavors." Amelia set down her fork, something cold settling in her stomach that had nothing to do with the food. "I believe a woman's intelligence and capabilities need not be confined to domestic matters," she said carefully. "Though I certainly value the importance of home and family." Thomas studied her, his earlier warmth noticeably cooled. "You speak with unusual conviction for a lady." "I was hired as a teacher precisely for my conviction," Amelia replied, unable to keep a hint of pride from her voice. "My students thrived under an approach that encouraged them to think critically rather than simply memorize." "And yet you are no longer teaching," Thomas observed. "Your letters mentioned a change in circumstances, but were vague on details." The conversation was veering into dangerous territory. Amelia took a sip of water, buying herself a moment. "The school's headmaster and I had differing philosophies on education," she said finally. "He preferred traditional methods. I advocated for more modern approaches." "And your advocacy cost you your position," Thomas concluded, his tone making it clear this was not a positive assessment. "Yes," Amelia admitted, seeing no point in denial. Thomas dabbed at his mouth with a napkin, his expression now plainly troubled. "Miss Hayes, I value honesty above all else. It seems to me you've omitted significant details about your temperament in our correspondence." "I've been entirely honest about my beliefs and values," Amelia protested. "My letters shared my thoughts on literature, philosophy, education, but not that you're the sort of woman who argues with her superiors to the point of dismissal," Thomas interrupted. "Not that you hold views that most would consider unfeminine in their assertiveness." Amelia felt heat rise to her face, this time from indignation rather than embarrassment. "I don't recall you asking about my level of assertiveness, Mr. Blackwell. You expressed admiration for my education and intellect." "Intellect in a woman is admirable when properly directed," he replied stiffly. But there's a difference between an educated mind and an argumentative nature. The gulf between the Thomas of the letters and the man before her widened with each exchange. Where was the thoughtful correspondent who had engaged with her ideas, who had written of his respect for her knowledge? Perhaps, Amelia suggested, struggling to keep her voice level, we both made assumptions in our correspondence that reality has not borne out. Thomas's jaw tightened. He glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware that their increasingly tense conversation had drawn a few curious glances. "Let's continue this discussion more privately," he said, his voice lowered. "My wagon is outside." Amelia nodded, her appetite gone. Thomas paid for their meal, and they walked in silence to where his wagon waited. The boy, Jimmy, had loaded her trunks into the back. Thomas helped her up to the seat with cool politeness, then took his place beside her. They rode in uncomfortable silence through town, past curious onlookers who clearly recognized Thomas and were eager for a glimpse of his Eastern bride. Amelia held her head high, despite the hollow feeling spreading through her chest. Only when they had left the town behind and were traveling the open road toward his ranch did Thomas speak again. "Miss Hayes, I believe we need to reconsider our arrangement." The words, though half expected, still struck with the force of a physical blow. "I see," Amelia managed. "I sought a companionable wife, yes, but also one who understands a woman's proper place," Thomas continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Someone who would bring refinement to my home without challenging my position in it or in the community." "You sought an ornament, not a partner," Amelia said quietly. Thomas's hands tightened on the reins. "That's precisely the sort of inflammatory statement I'm referring to. A lady would express herself more delicately." "I express myself clearly," Amelia replied, past caring about the consequences. "That was valued in Boston, at least in educational circles." "This isn't Boston," Thomas said flatly. "The frontier requires different qualities in a woman. Compliance, support, gentle guidance rather than bold assertion." Amelia looked out at the vast landscape stretching around them, beautiful, wild, and suddenly as unwelcoming as the man beside her. "What do you propose, Mr. Blackwell? That I modify my entire personality to suit your expectations?" Thomas sighed, shaking his head. "I don't believe that would be possible, even if you were willing. Some qualities are too deeply ingrained to change." "Then what?" "I'll provide funds for your return journey to Boston," he said, his tone suggesting he was being exceedingly generous. "We'll explain to the town that there was a misunderstanding about the terms of our arrangement. No need for undue embarrassment on either side." Amelia stared at him, incredulous. "You would send me back? After I've sold everything? Have I traveled? Thousands of miles? What alternative do you suggest?" Thomas asked, a hint of irritation breaking through his controlled facade. "That we proceed with a marriage doomed to discord? That I present the town with a wife who would constantly challenge my standing with her inappropriate forthrightness?" Everything inside Amelia rebelled against the injustice of it. "I believed your letters," she said, her voice barely audible, "over the wagon's wheels. I thought you wanted an educated woman with her own mind. Education as an accomplishment is different from using it to defy conventional expectations," Thomas replied. "Surely you understand that." The wagon crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch below. A large main house, barns, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings spread across well-maintained grounds. In other circumstances, the sight would have filled Amelia with joy. Now it represented everything she had journeyed so far to find, only to have it snatched away because she had not hidden her true self well enough. "I can't return to Boston," she said finally. "There's nothing left for me there." "That's hardly my concern, Miss Hayes," Thomas said, though he had the decency to sound somewhat troubled by her predicament. "However, I can provide sufficient funds for you to establish yourself elsewhere. Denver, perhaps, or San Francisco, somewhere your progressive attitudes might find more acceptance. Amelia sat silently as Thomas's wagon approached the ranch, her mind racing with diminishing options. Pride demanded she accept his money and leave immediately. Practicality urged caution. She had nowhere to go, limited funds and no connections. In this unfamiliar territory, as they pulled up to the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch, stout, grey-haired, with an expression of keen interest as she spotted Amelia. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, Amelia presumed. "Mr. Blackwell," the woman called, wiping her hands on her apron. "We weren't expecting you back so soon." Thomas set the brake and jumped down from the wagon without offering Amelia assistance. "Change of plans, Mrs. Winters," he said crisply. "Miss Hayes will be staying only tonight. She'll depart on tomorrow's eastbound stage." The housekeeper's eyes widened, darting between Thomas and Amelia with undisguised curiosity. Amelia, refusing to be discussed as if absent, climbed down from the wagon herself, straightening her travel-worn dress with as much dignity as she could muster. "Mrs. Winters," she said, extending her hand, "a pleasure to meet you, though it seems our acquaintance will be brief." The older woman took her hand, surprise evident on her weathered face. "Miss Hayes, welcome, such as it is." She shot Thomas a questioning look. "Please show Miss Hayes to the guest room," Thomas instructed, ignoring the silent inquiry. "Have her trunks brought up. I need to speak with Miller about tomorrow's cattle drive." Without another word to Amelia, he strode off toward one of the outbuildings, leaving her standing in the dust beside the bewildered housekeeper. "Well," Mrs. Winters said after an awkward pause, "let's get you settled then. You must be exhausted from your journey." Amelia followed the woman into the house, which was larger and more refined than she had expected for a frontier ranch. The entryway opened to a spacious living area, furnished with solid, well-crafted pieces. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with the volumes Thomas had mentioned in his letters. Through an archway, she glimpsed a formal dining room with a polished table that could seat at least 12. "This way, miss," Mrs. Winters directed, leading her up a wide staircase to the second floor. "The guest room has its own washroom. I'll have hot water sent up shortly." The guest room was pleasant, if impersonal. A four-poster bed with crisp linens, a dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk positioned before a window that overlooked the ranch's western pastures. In the distance, mountains rose against the late afternoon sky, tinged pink and gold by the setting sun. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters," Amelia said, sinking onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. The housekeeper hesitated in the doorway, sympathy softening her features. "Dinner's at 6, though. Given the circumstances, I could bring a tray up if you prefer." "I would appreciate that," Amelia replied, grateful for the woman's understanding. Mrs. Winters nodded, then asked cautiously, "If you don't mind my asking, miss, what happened? The whole town's been talking about Mr. Blackwell's bride-to-be for weeks," Amelia sighed, too weary for pretense. "Mr. Blackwell discovered I possess a mind of my own and express it too freely for his comfort." To her surprise, Mrs. Winters didn't look shocked. Instead, something like resignation passed across her face. "Ah, well, that would do it. You don't seem surprised." "Mr. Blackwell is a fine employer," the housekeeper said carefully. "Fair with wages, never unreasonable in his demands, but he has particular ideas about a woman's proper conduct." "Indeed," Amelia replied dryly. Mrs. Winters offered a sympathetic smile. "I'll have your things brought up and send water for washing. Rest now. Tomorrow's troubles will wait their turn." Left alone, Amelia methodically removed her travel-stained clothes and washed away the dust of her journey with the warm water a serving girl brought up. She changed into a simple cotton dress, one of her everyday garments back in Boston. Now, among her finest remaining possessions. Sitting at the small desk, she took stock of her situation with the clear-eyed practicality that had seen her through previous hardships. She had $17.43 in her purse, her entire savings, after purchasing the stage ticket west. Thomas had promised funds for her return journey, but even if she accepted his money, what awaited her in Boston? No position, no family, and now an even more tarnished reputation as a rejected bride. Denver, perhaps, as Thomas had suggested, or San Francisco. Both cities were growing and might have needed an educated woman, though without references, securing a teaching position would be challenging. But at least in larger cities, there might be other opportunities for an educated woman that didn't exist in smaller communities. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Winters entered with a tray, roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. "You've been most kind, Mrs. Winters," Amelia said as the woman set down the tray. "Thank you." "It's nothing," the housekeeper replied, but her expression suggested she had more to say. She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Blackwell mentioned you were a teacher back east." "Yes, for 3 years at the Darby School for Girls in Boston." Mrs. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Well, eat while it's hot. Ring if you need anything else." After she'd gone, Amelia ate mechanically, barely tasting the well-prepared food. As darkness fell outside her window, she felt more alone than she had even after her parents' deaths. Then at least she'd been in familiar surroundings, with neighbors and colleagues who, if not close friends, were at least known quantities. Here, she was utterly adrift in unfamiliar territory, rejected by the one person she'd counted on for security. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind churning with possibilities and contingencies. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would accept Thomas's money, pride be damned, and take the stage to Denver. There, she would seek lodging in a respectable boarding house and look for work of any kind that might sustain her while she sought a more permanent position. The early morning sun was just cresting the eastern hills when Amelia, fully dressed and composed, descended the stairs. She found Mrs. Winters in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "You're up early, Miss Hayes," the housekeeper observed. "Breakfast won't be ready for another hour." "I couldn't sleep," Amelia admitted. "Is Mr. Blackwell awake?" "He left." "At first light," Mrs. Winters replied. "There's a problem with the north pasture fence. He said to tell you he'd return mid-morning to take you to town for the stage." Disappointment and relief mingled in Amelia's chest. She had hoped to conclude their business quickly, to end this unfortunate chapter with dignity and move forward. Now she faced hours of awkward waiting. "I see," she said. "Well, perhaps I might walk the grounds while I wait. I'd like to see a bit of the ranch before I leave." Mrs. Winters glanced out the window. "It's a fine morning for it. Just stay within sight of the house. It's easy for city folk to misjudge distances out here." Amelia thanked her and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The ranch looked different in the early light, more vibrant, alive with activity. Ranch hands moved between the barn and corrals, horses nickered from the stables, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the verdant pastures. It was beautiful, this life Thomas had built. Amelia felt a pang of regret, not for the loss of Thomas himself. Their brief interaction had extinguished any romantic notions, but for the life she had imagined here. Teaching, perhaps, starting a small school for the ranch hands' children and neighboring families, tending a garden, keeping a library, becoming part of a community unlike any she'd known in Boston. Lost in thought, Amelia wandered toward a small meadow near the main house where wildflowers grew in cheerful profusion. As she approached, she heard a child's voice, high and distressed. "Please, Daisy, be careful. You'll fall." Rounding a large cottonwood tree, Amelia discovered a young girl, of perhaps 10, looking up anxiously at a calico cat perched on a high branch. "Oh," the girl exclaimed, startled by Amelia's appearance. "Who are you?" "Amelia Hayes," she replied, smiling at the child. "And who might you be?" "Lucy Miller. My pa works for Mr. Blackwell." The girl pointed up at the tree. "Daisy's stuck again. She climbs up but gets scared to come down." Amelia assessed the situation. The cat wasn't terribly high, but certainly beyond the reach of a small girl. "Would you like some help?" she offered. Lucy nodded eagerly. "Could you? Pa says I'm not going to climb trees in my good dress, and I promised." "A promise worth keeping," Amelia agreed, glancing at her own attire. Her dress was simple enough, and what did a few snags matter now? "Stand back a bit, Lucy. I'll see what I can do." With a determination that would have scandalized Boston society, Amelia hiked her skirts slightly and found a foothold on the tree's broad trunk. It had been years since she'd climbed a tree, not since she was Lucy's age, spending summers at her grandparents' farm in Vermont. But the skill returned quickly. Careful, step by careful step, she made her way up to where the calico cat watched, her approach with wary yellow eyes. "Hello, Daisy," Amelia said softly. "You've gotten yourself into quite a predicament, haven't you?" The cat meowed plaintively. Amelia inched closer along the branch, speaking in soothing tones until she was near enough to gently grasp the animal. Tucking Daisy securely against her chest with one arm, she began her cautious descent. She was nearly to the ground when a man's voice rang out, sharp with surprise. "What in God's name are you doing, woman?" Startled, Amelia lost her footing on the last branch and half, fell the remaining few feet, landing awkwardly, but managing to keep the cat safe. Lucy rushed forward to claim her pet. As Amelia turned to face the voice, a tall man stood watching her, his expression a mix of amazement and something that might have been amusement, though he quickly suppressed it. He was dressed in working clothes. A flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing tanned, muscular forearms, worn denims, and scuffed boots. Unlike Thomas's carefully groomed appearance, this man sported several days' worth of stubble and hair that curled untidily from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I was rescuing Daisy," Amelia explained, brushing debris from her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. "I can see that," the man replied, his voice deep and resonant. "Not exactly ladylike behavior, though, is it?" Amelia bristled. "I wasn't aware that kindness had gender restrictions, Mr. Grant. Daniel Grant." He studied her with undisguised curiosity. "And you must be Blackwell's mail-order bride." "Miss Hayes," she corrected firmly. "And as it happens, I am not to be Mr. Blackwell's bride after all." Something flickered in Daniel Grant's eyes. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. "Is that so? Mr. Grant!" Lucy piped up, cradling her rescued cat. "Miss Hayes climbed all the way up to the scary branch. She wasn't afraid at all." Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at the child. "So I saw Lucy. That was very brave of her." He glanced back at Amelia, a hint of genuine respect in his expression now. "Thank you for helping her. Lucy's father would be heartbroken if anything happened to that cat. It was her mother's before she passed." The simple statement shifted something in the atmosphere between them. Amelia felt her defensiveness ebb slightly. "I was happy to help." Daisy seemed quite distressed. "Lucy, you should head home now," Daniel said gently. "Your pa will be looking for you." The girl nodded, thanked Amelia again, and scurried off toward one of the smaller houses visible in the distance, the cat secure in her arms. Alone with Daniel Grant, Amelia became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her dress snagged. In places, her hair loosened from its pins, smudges of bark probably marking her hands and face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gruff manner softening slightly. "That was quite a drop at the end." "My dignity suffered more than my person," Amelia replied truthfully, "though I may have twisted my ankle slightly." Daniel took a step forward, concern evident. "Let me help you back to the house." That's not necessary, Mr. Grant. I can manage. He raised an eyebrow. Stubborn, aren't you? Independent, she corrected, though without rancor. There's a difference. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, unlike Thomas's practiced social expressions. So there is. Still, the ground's uneven here. At least take my arm. Amelia hesitated, then nodded, accepting the support he offered. His arm was solid beneath her hand, steady as they began walking slowly toward the main house. So, if you don't mind my asking, Daniel said after a moment, why aren't you Blackwell's bride, after all? You only just arrived yesterday, from what I hear. Amelia considered deflecting the question, but found herself oddly inclined toward honesty with this stranger. Mr. Blackwell discovered I possess opinions and express them too freely for his comfort. Daniel let out a short laugh, then quickly sobered. My apologies, Miss Hayes. It's just... That sounds exactly like Thomas. You know him well? Amelia asked, curious about the apparent familiarity. Daniel's expression grew more guarded. I lease the adjoining property. Our dealings are primarily related to water rights and grazing. And boundaries. Something in his tone suggested a more complicated history than simple neighbors, but Amelia didn't press. They walked in silence for a few moments before he spoke again. What will you do now? Take the stage to Denver, she replied. Seek employment there. As a teacher, she glanced at him, surprised by his perception. How did you know I taught? You have that look about you, he said, a hint of smile returning. Like you're constantly evaluating whether a thing is going to turn out educational. Amelia laughed, despite herself. Yes, well, teaching is my profession, though whether Denver will have use for a female educator without references remains to be seen. They had reached the main house now. Daniel released her arm, stepping back respectfully. Miss Hayes, Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both turned to see Thomas riding toward them, his expression darkening as he recognized Daniel. Grant, he said coldly as he dismounted, what are you doing on my property? Helping Miss Hayes back to the house, Daniel replied, his earlier warmth replaced by a cool formality that matched Thomas's tone. She took a fall, rescuing Lucy Miller's cat. Thomas's gaze swept over Amelia, taking in her disheveled appearance, with obvious disapproval. I see. Well, your assistance is no longer required. I'll escort Miss Hayes from here. Daniel nodded stiffly. Of course. He turned to Amelia, touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Good day, Miss Hayes. Safe travels? To Denver. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Grant, she replied, oddly reluctant to see him go. They watched as Daniel walked away toward where a horse was tethered near the cottonwood tree. Only when he was mounted and riding toward the property line did Thomas turn to Amelia, his expression severe. I return to find you climbing trees and consorting with Daniel Grant of all people, he said, his voice tight with displeasure. It seems my assessment of your character was entirely accurate. Amelia straightened, refusing to be cowed. I was helping a child rescue her pet, Mr. Blackwell. As for consorting, Mr. Grant merely offered assistance when I twisted my ankle in the descent. You might show some concern for my well-being rather than my social interactions. Thomas's jaw tightened. Your well-being is precisely my concern. Daniel Grant is not a man whose acquaintance a respectable woman should cultivate. Why? Amelia asked bluntly. Because he was kind to a distressed child and a stranded traveler? Because he is my competitor and adversary, Thomas replied sharply. Because he holds radical views on everything from land rights to labor relations. Because he employs Mexican vaqueros and treats them as equals. Because he is, in short, exactly the sort of disruptive influence this territory doesn't need as it develops. Each point Thomas listed struck Amelia not as the condemnation he clearly intended, but as intriguing revelations about the man she'd just met. She kept her expression neutral, however, unwilling to further antagonize Thomas, when she still depended on his goodwill for her immediate future. "I see," she said simply. "Well, you needn't concern yourself further. I'll be gone within hours." Thomas seemed to recollect himself, his manner becoming more controlled. "Yes, about that. The stage doesn't depart until tomorrow morning." There was a mechanical issue with the coach. Dismay washed over Amelia. Another full day and night in this awkward limbo. "I see. I've arranged everything," Thomas continued, his tone suggesting he expected gratitude for his efficiency. "Passage to Denver, funds for your immediate needs upon arrival, and a letter of introduction to Mrs. Catherine Stanton, a widow of my acquaintance who runs a respectable boarding house. She occasionally needs help with bookkeeping and correspondence, which should suit your abilities." The arrangements were practical, even generous from a certain perspective. Yet Amelia couldn't help but feel like livestock being traded, her future decided and arranged without her input or consultation. "Thank you," she said, the words sticking in her throat. "That's very thoughtful." Thomas either missed or ignored the irony in her tone. "Yes, well, I believe in taking responsibility for one's mistakes, even when they aren't entirely of one's own making." The implication that she was a mistake he needed to rectify stung, but Amelia kept her composure. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Blackwell, I should change into something more presentable. My current state seems to distress you." Without waiting for his permission, she turned and entered the house, back straight, despite the throbbing in her ankle. She passed Mrs. Winters in the hallway, the housekeeper's concerned gaze following her as she climbed the stairs to the guest room. Once alone, Amelia allowed herself a moment of weakness, sinking onto the bed and pressing her hands to her eyes to stem the tears of frustration threatening to fall. She would not cry. Not over Thomas Blackwell's rejection, not over her uncertain future, not even over the strange, unexpected connection she'd felt with a man she'd likely never see again. She had faced adversity before and would do so again. Denver awaited, and with it, the chance to build a life on her own terms, without compromising the forthright nature and independent mind that had brought her both trouble and triumph throughout her life. A soft knock at the door roused her from these thoughts. "Miss Hayes?" Mrs. Winters called. "May I come in?" "Yes, of course," Amelia replied, quickly composing herself. The housekeeper entered, carrying a basin of warm water and a small jar. "I heard about your fall. This is arnica salve, good for bruises and sprains. Let me see that ankle." Touched by the woman's kindness, Amelia allowed Mrs. Winters to examine her injury, which had swollen slightly but didn't appear seriously damaged. "Just a mild sprain," the housekeeper confirmed, applying the salve with gentle fingers. "Keep it elevated when you can. Should be much improved by tomorrow's stage." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." The older woman hesitated, then said quietly, "I heard you met Daniel Grant." Something in her tone piqued Amelia's curiosity. "Yes, he seems different from Mr. Blackwell." Mrs. Winters gave a soft snort. "Like night and day, those two. Been at odds for years. Ever since Daniel came back from college with all his new ideas and started changing how things were done at his family's ranch. They knew each other before. Grew up together," Mrs. Winters confirmed, wrapping Amelia's ankle with practiced efficiency. "Were even friends once, if you can believe it, until the drought of 72 changed everything." Amelia's curiosity deepened. "What happened?" The housekeeper glanced toward the door, as if checking they were truly alone, then continued in a lowered voice. "The creek that feeds both properties nearly dried up. Thomas's father, he owned this ranch then, diverted what water remained to his fields, leaving Grant land to parch. Daniel's father rode over to negotiate, but ended up in a heated argument with old Mr. Blackwell. Had a heart attack right there." In the yard, died before they could fetch the doctor. Mrs. Winters fell silent, her story hanging in the air between them. Amelia stared at the housekeeper, astonished by this revelation. Daniel's father died during an argument with Thomas's father, over water rights. The way some tell it, old Mr. Blackwell refused water to the Grants out of spite, Mrs. Winters said, her voice barely above a whisper. Others say Mr. Grant was unreasonable, demanding more than his fair share. Truth probably lies somewhere in between, as it usually does. And Daniel was away at college when this happened. Harvard University, studying modern agricultural methods. Mrs. Winters confirmed. Had to come home and take over the ranch at 22. His mother had passed years before, and there was no one else. The pieces clicked into place. Daniel Grant's obvious tension with Thomas, the reference to water rights, Thomas's disdain for his neighbor's radical ideas. Daniel never married? Amelia asked, surprising herself with the personal question. Mrs. Winters gave her a knowing look. No, though not for lack of interest from local girls and their mothers. He's too busy revolutionizing ranching methods and causing Thomas headaches to settle down, folks say. She rose, gathering her supplies. There, that ankle should feel better soon. Rest it while you can. Thank you, Amelia said, both for the care and the information. Mrs. Winters, do you happen to know if the town needs a teacher? The housekeeper paused at the door. Hawks Valley, they've been without a proper schoolmarm for nearly 6 months. The minister's wife teaches reading and basic arithmetic 3 days a week, but she's expecting her 4th child and can't continue much longer. She studied Amelia with fresh interest. Are you thinking of staying? I'm considering all options, Amelia replied carefully. The seed of an idea had taken root, one that felt increasingly more appealing than fleeing to Denver. Would you happen to know whom I might speak with about such a position? Mayor Phillips oversees the school board, Mrs. Winters said. His office is above the Mercantile. She hesitated, then added, though you should know, Thomas has considerable influence with the mayor. If he opposes your appointment, the implication was clear. Thomas Blackwell could easily prevent her from securing a position in Hawks Valley if he chose. I see, Amelia said, disappointment settling over her. Thank you for your candor. After Mrs. Winters departed, Amelia sat by the window, gazing out at the sprawling ranch lands. The idea of remaining in Hawks Valley, establishing herself as an independent woman, proving her worth through her own merits rather than a matrimonial arrangement, appealed to something fundamental in her nature. But Mrs. Winters was right. If Thomas opposed her, she stood little chance of success in a community where he wielded significant influence. Perhaps Denver truly was her only viable option. With a sigh, Amelia began repacking her belongings, preparing for tomorrow's departure. As she worked, her mind drifted to Daniel Grant. Their brief encounter had left a strong impression. His defense of those Thomas considered beneath notice, Mexican vaqueros, outspoken women, suggested a man of character and conviction, one who judged people by their actions rather than societal expectations. She would likely never see him again. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret. A knock at her door interrupted these reflections. She opened it to find a young ranch, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable. Begging your pardon, Miss Hayes. Mr. Blackwell asked me to fetch you for lunch. Thank you, Amelia replied. Please tell Mr. Blackwell I'll be down shortly. Lunch proved to be an awkward affair. Thomas was formally polite but distant, discussing his ranch operations with the foreman who joined them while largely ignoring Amelia. The foreman, Mr. Peterson, kept shooting curious glances her way, clearly aware of her changed status, but too professional to comment. As they finished the meal, Thomas finally addressed her directly. Miss Hayes, I must ride to town this afternoon to arrange your passage and accommodations in Denver. I trust you'll be comfortable here until my return. Quite comfortable, thank you, Amelia replied, matching his detached tone. Excellent. I should return by supper. He stood, nodded to her with cool courtesy, and departed. Left to her own devices for the afternoon, Amelia decided to explore the ranch house further. The library Thomas had mentioned in his letters proved impressive. Hundreds of volumes, many, expensively bound, arranged by subject, history, agriculture, law, politics, but scarcely any literature or poetry. The collection reflected Thomas's practical utilitarian worldview. She selected a history of Wyoming Territory and settled into a comfortable chair, determined to learn more about the place she'd so briefly called home. The book proved surprisingly engaging, detailing the territory's unique stance on women's suffrage, the first in the nation to grant women voting rights, though driven by practical considerations rather than ideological commitment to equality. Deep in her reading, Amelia didn't immediately notice the commotion outside. Only when raised voices penetrated the quiet of the library did she look up, moving to the window to investigate. In the yard, several ranch hands had gathered around a horse and rider who had just arrived. The rider, a young Mexican man, was speaking urgently, his hands gesturing as he explained something to the group. The men looked grave, conferring among themselves. Curious, Amelia left the library and made her way outside. As she approached, the ranch hands fell silent, eyeing her uncertainty. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Mr. Peterson, the foreman, stepped forward. "Nothing to concern yourself with, Miss Hayes. Just a problem with some strays." The Mexican rider caught her eye, seemingly about to speak, when Peterson shot him a warning glance. The young man fell silent, ducking his head respectfully. "Are you certain?" Amelia pressed, sensing there was more to the situation. "Perhaps I could help in some way." "No, ma'am," Peterson insisted firmly. "Mr. Blackwell left strict instructions that you weren't to be troubled with ranch business." "I see." Amelia turned to the Mexican rider. "What's your name?" The young man looked startled to be addressed directly. "Miguel Hernandez, señorita." "Mr. Hernandez, what brings you here with such urgency?" Miguel glanced at Peterson, who frowned but gave a reluctant nod. "There is fever among the cattle in the north pasture," Miguel explained, his English clear but accented. "Many sick, some already dead. I work for Senor Grant. He sent me to warn Mr. Blackwell because the sickness could spread to his herd." "That's remarkably neighborly of Mr. Grant, considering their history," Amelia observed. Peterson's expression tightened. "Grant knows. Diseased cattle affect everyone's bottom line. It's self-interest, not neighborliness. We must move the healthy cattle away from the sick ones," Miguel continued. "Senor Grant says to tell Mr. Blackwell he will help if needed." The ranch hands exchanged dubious looks. Clearly accepting help from Daniel Grant was not something they expected Thomas to approve. "Mr. Blackwell won't return until evening," Peterson said grimly. "By then, we could lose more cattle." "Then act now," Amelia suggested, the solution seeming obvious. "Separate the healthy animals from the sick, as Mr. Hernandez suggests." Peterson looked at her as if she'd proposed something outlandish. "Mr. Blackwell prefers to make such decisions himself, miss. And if he were here, he would," Amelia replied firmly. "But he's not, and his cattle are dying. Surely he would want you to take reasonable measures to protect his investment." The men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Amelia realized she had overstepped in their eyes. A woman, especially one rejected as a potential wife, had no business offering opinions on ranch management, but to her surprise, Peterson nodded slowly. "You make a fair point, Miss Hayes." He turned to the other hands. "Jenkins, take 4 men and start moving the healthy stock to the south pasture. Williams, rides into town and find Mr. Blackwell. Tell him what's happening." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Peterson turned back to Miguel. "Thank your boss for the warning. We'll handle things from here." Miguel nodded but lingered, seeming reluctant to leave. Senor Grant has experience with this sickness from when it struck near his father's ranch in Texas. He knows how to treat the animals that can be saved. Peterson's pride visibly warred with practicality. Finally, he said, "Tell Grant if he wants to send advice on treatment, we'd hear it." "He will come himself," Miguel replied confidently. "He is already preparing medicines." After the young rider departed, Peterson glanced at Amelia with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Mr. Blackwell won't like that we acted without consulting him, or that we're accepting Grant's help. Mr. Blackwell should appreciate that you protected his interests in his absence," Amelia replied. "As for Mr. Grant's assistance, well, refusing aid out of pride seems foolish when livelihoods are at stake." Peterson studied her for a moment, then shook his head with something resembling amusement. "I can see why things didn't work out between you and the boss, Miss Hayes. You're a woman who speaks her mind plainly. Is that a criticism, Mr. Peterson?" "No, ma'am," he replied, surprising her. "My late wife was the same way. Made life interesting but never dull." With a tip of his hat, he strode off to organize the remaining men. Amelia returned to the house, oddly exhilarated by the exchange. For the first time since arriving in Hawks Valley, she felt useful, her opinion valued and acted upon, even if only in a crisis. She spent the next hour watching from the porch, as the ranch hands worked with impressive efficiency, moving cattle from one pasture to another, setting up a quarantine area for the sick animals. Around mid-afternoon, a wagon appeared on the horizon, approaching from the direction of the Grant ranch. As it drew closer, Amelia recognized Daniel Grant at the reins, accompanied by Miguel and another Mexican worker. The wagon was loaded with supplies, barrels, crates, and what appeared to be medical equipment. The ranch hands paused in their work, watching warily as the wagon pulled into the yard. Daniel spotted Amelia on the porch and tipped his hat in, greeting before focusing on Peterson, who approached with cautious respect. "Grant," the foreman acknowledged, "didn't expect you to come yourself." "Epidemics don't care about property lines, Peterson," Daniel replied. "Better to contain it quickly. I've brought willow bark tea and spirits of turpentine for the affected animals. Works better than anything else I've tried." "Blackwell's not here," Peterson warned. "Can't authorize using your methods without his say-so." Daniel's expression revealed nothing. "Then I'll wait. But every hour means more lost cattle." Amelia descended from the porch, drawn to the conversation despite herself. "Mr. Peterson, given the circumstances, surely Mr. Blackwell would prioritize saving his herd over protocol." Both men turned to her, Peterson with resignation, Daniel with a flash of surprised approval. "Miss Hayes," Daniel greeted her. "I didn't expect to find you still here." "The stage to Denver departs tomorrow," she explained. "I'm merely in transit." Something like disappointment crossed Daniel's features, quickly masked. "I see." Peterson looked between them, then sighed heavily. "Fine. Show us your treatment method, Grant. But if Blackwell objects, it's on your head, not mine." For the next few hours, Amelia watched from a respectful distance as Daniel, Miguel, and the other worker, introduced as Luis, demonstrated their treatment methods to the Blackwell ranch hands. Daniel worked alongside his men without hesitation, getting as dirty and sweaty as anyone else as they treated the sick animals. His approach with the ranch hands impressed her, explaining rather than dictating, demonstrating respect for their knowledge while sharing his own. There was no hint of the hierarchical relationship Thomas maintained with his workers. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Amelia noticed Daniel stepping away from the group, moving toward the water trough where he splashed his face and neck. Without fully intending to, she found herself walking in his direction. "Your treatment seems to be working," she observed as she approached. "Mr. Peterson looks cautiously optimistic." Daniel turned, droplets of water clinging to his beard. Some will still be lost, but many should recover. He studied her with open curiosity. You're still watching. Most ladies would have retreated to the parlor hours ago. I've never been particularly skilled at being most ladies, Amelia replied dryly. Hence my current transitional state. A smile tugged at his mouth. Blackwell's loss, if you don't mind my saying so. That remains to be seen, she said. Though I admit I'm grateful not to be entering a marriage where I'd need to diminish myself to maintain harmony. Diminish yourself? Daniel repeated, his expression darkening. Is that what he expected? Mr. Blackwell sought a wife who understood her proper place, Amelia explained, surprised by her own candor with this virtual stranger. My tendency to express opinions directly proved incompatible with his vision. Daniel shook his head, genuine dismay evident in his features. The West needs strong women, Miss Hayes, the kind who speak their minds and face challenges head-on. The frontier doesn't survive on delicate sensibilities. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Amelia, a resonance with her own beliefs that she'd rarely encountered, especially in a man. You employ Mexican workers, she noted, changing the subject slightly. Mr. Blackwell seemed to find that objectionable. Miguel and Luis are skilled vaqueros, Daniel replied simply. Their expertise with cattle exceeds most of the white hands. I could hire. I judge men by their abilities and character, not their origins. A progressive view, a practical one. He shrugged, though I suppose that makes me a radical in some eyes. They fell silent for a moment, each aware of the unusual ease of their conversation despite their brief acquaintance. Denver will be fortunate to gain such a forthright schoolteacher, Daniel said finally, a note of regret in his voice. Before Amelia could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Thomas Blackwell rode into the yard, accompanied by the ranch hand who had been sent to fetch him. His expression darkened as he took in the scene. Daniel Grant on his property, his men working alongside Grant's Mexican vaqueros, and Amelia engaged in what appeared to be friendly conversation with his rival. Thomas dismounted in one fluid motion, striding toward them with barely contained anger. "What is the meaning of this, Peterson?" he demanded of the foreman, who hurried to meet him. As Peterson explained the situation, Thomas's gaze kept darting to Amelia and Daniel, his displeasure evident in the tight line of his mouth. "You should go," Amelia said quietly to Daniel. "This will be difficult enough without your presence inflaming the situation." Daniel hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her to face Thomas's anger. "Will you be all right?" The concern in his voice touched her. "Perfectly. Mr. Blackwell may disapprove of my outspokenness, but he's not a cruel man, just traditional." Still, Daniel lingered. "Miss Hayes, Amelia, if you ever reconsider Denver—" Thomas was approaching now, his conversation with Peterson concluded. Daniel fell silent, turning to face the ranch owner with composed dignity. "Grant," Thomas acknowledged coldly, "I understand. I'm to thank you for your unsolicited intervention." "Your cattle were dying, Blackwell," Daniel replied evenly. "I have experience with this particular fever. It seemed neighborly to offer assistance." "Neighborly," Thomas repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "And had nothing to do with the opportunity to demonstrate your supposedly superior methods to my men." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Believe what you will. The treatment's working. That's what matters." "I'll be the judge of what matters on my ranch," Thomas snapped. Then, with visible effort, he moderated his tone. "Nevertheless, thank you for the warning about the outbreak. That much at least was considerate." It was clearly the closest thing to gratitude Daniel could expect. He nodded once, accepting the meager acknowledgement. "The treatment will need to continue for the next few days. Miguel can stay behind to show your men the proper administration, if you'll permit it." Thomas looked as if he'd swallowed something sour, but practicality won out over pride. Fine. Peterson will arrange accommodations for him. Daniel turned to Amelia, touching his hat respectfully. Miss Hayes, I wish you safe travels and good fortune in Denver. Something in his eyes conveyed more than his polite words. Regret, perhaps, for possibilities unexplored. Thank you, Mr. Grant, for your kindness during my stay, she replied, equally formal though her feelings were anything but. With a final nod to Thomas, neither friendly nor overtly hostile, Daniel collected Luis and departed, leaving Miguel to continue the treatment regime. As the wagon rumbled away, Thomas turned to Amelia, his expression stern. I return to find my ranch in disarray, my men taking orders from Daniel Grant, and you, a woman under my protection, conversing freely with him as if he were a social equal. Mr. Grant was responding to an emergency that threatened your livelihood. Amelia replied calmly, as for our conversation, it was entirely proper and primarily concerned the treatment of your cattle. Thomas studied her face, seeming to search for deception or defiance. Finding neither, Amelia had spoken the literal truth, if not the complete emotional context. He sighed. It seems I cannot leave you unattended for even an afternoon without incident, Miss Hayes. Perhaps it's fortunate for both of us that tomorrow will mark the end of our association. The words were meant to sting, but Amelia found them oddly liberating. In less than 24 hours, she would be free of Thomas Blackwell's judgment and disapproval. Free to start anew in Denver, or perhaps an idea began forming in her mind, bold, possibly foolhardy, but increasingly compelling. Yes, she agreed mildly. Fortunate indeed. Thomas, perhaps expecting an argument, looked momentarily disconcerted by her easy acquiescence. Yes, well, supper will be served at 6. I have matters to attend to with Peterson before then. After he strode away, Amelia remained where she stood, watching the distant figure of Daniel Grant's wagon growing smaller on the horizon. The feeling of connection she'd experienced in their brief interactions lingered, a counterpoint to the stifling disapproval that characterized her every exchange with Thomas. Two men, so different in their views of the world and a woman's place within it. One who would have her diminish herself to fit his expectations, another who seemed to value precisely those qualities the first found objectionable. As Amelia turned toward the house, her resolve strengthened. Tomorrow would indeed mark a new beginning, but perhaps not the one Thomas Blackwell had arranged for her. Perhaps not Denver after all. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming territory, Amelia Hayes felt something like hope taking root alongside her determination. The West changed people, the elderly woman on the stagecoach had said. Sometimes for better, sometimes not, but it always revealed who they truly were. Let's see who I truly am, Amelia whispered to herself, climbing the porch steps with renewed purpose. Dinner that evening was a stilted affair. Thomas maintained a cool politeness, discussing his plans for Amelia's departure with the detached efficiency of a man arranging a business transaction. Mrs. Winters served them silently, though Amelia caught the housekeeper watching her with something like concern in her eyes. The stage departs at 9 tomorrow morning, Thomas informed her as they finished their meal. I've reserved your seat and provided letters of introduction to Mrs. Stanton in Denver, as discussed. You've been thorough, Amelia acknowledged. I appreciate the arrangements. Thomas nodded stiffly. I've also included sufficient funds to sustain you for 2 months while you secure employment. He slid an envelope across the table. $300. I trust that will prove adequate. Amelia stared at the envelope, momentarily speechless. The sum was generous, far more than she had expected, and certainly more than necessary for a simple return journey. It suggested a guilty conscience, perhaps, or at least a desire to end their arrangement with his self-image as a gentleman intact. That's "Exceedingly generous, Mr. Blackwell." "I'm not an unreasonable man, Miss Hayes," he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "Our match proved unsuitable, but I bear you no ill will." Amelia considered refusing the money. Pride urged her to, but practicality won out. Whatever path she chose tomorrow, additional funds would only expand her options. "Thank you," she said simply, taking the envelope. Thomas seemed relieved by her acceptance. "Very good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have correspondence to attend to." He rose from the table with a formal nod. "I wish you a pleasant evening and restful sleep before your journey." Left alone, Amelia lingered at the table, fingering the envelope thoughtfully. $300 represented freedom, options, security, at least temporarily. Combined with her own meager savings, it could sustain her for months in Denver, while she sought suitable employment, or the alternative plan that had been forming in her mind all afternoon resurfaced. Bold, risky, perhaps foolhardy, but increasingly appealing. "More coffee, Miss Hayes?" Mrs. Winters appeared at her elbow, coffee pot in hand. "Yes, thank you." Amelia accepted the fresh cup gratefully. "Mrs. Winters, what can you tell me about Hawks Valley? Not just the school situation, but the town itself, the people." The housekeeper set down the pot and settled into the chair Thomas had vacated, recognizing an invitation to conversation. "It's a young town," she began, "established just after the war, built around the cattle industry mostly, though there's some mining interests developing in the foothills north of here. About 600 souls in town proper, another 400 or so scattered on surrounding ranches and homesteads. And the people, their character." Mrs. Winters considered this. "Hard-working, mostly, traditional in some ways. Church on Sundays, social hierarchy that puts ranchers like Mr. Blackwell at the top. But practical, too. Out here, folks value competence over pedigree when push comes to shove. And women's roles. I understand Wyoming Territory has granted women the vote." "Indeed, first in the nation," Mrs. Winters confirmed with evident pride. "Doesn't mean there's not still plenty who think a woman's place is strictly in the home. But there's opportunity here for those willing to carve their own path. We've got a lady who runs the millinery shop, another who bought the newspaper after her husband passed, even a female doctor over in Cheyenne." Amelia absorbed this information, hoping to kindle further. "And what of Mayor Phillips? You mentioned he oversees the school board. Cautious man, values stability and propriety." Mrs. Winters gave her a shrewd look. "You're thinking of staying, aren't you? Seeking a teaching position?" "I'm considering it," Amelia admitted. "Though, as you pointed out, Mr. Blackwell's opposition would likely prove an insurmountable obstacle." Mrs. Winters drummed her fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Perhaps, though the town's desperate for a qualified teacher, and not everyone. He bows to Thomas Blackwell's preferences, despite his influence. Daniel Grant, for instance," Amelia suggested, attempting a casual tone. The housekeeper's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Mr. Grant sits on the school board himself, as it happens. Only agreed to serve after the last teacher left, saying education was too important to leave solely in the hands of men like Mayor Phillips and Mr. Blackwell." This new information sent Amelia's thoughts racing. Daniel Grant on the school board? That changed the equation considerably. "Mrs. Winters, would it be possible for me to ride into town early tomorrow, before the stage departs? There are inquiries I'd like to make." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. "Jenkins could drive you in the light wagon. He needs to pick up supplies anyway." She paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "The school board meets at 8 tomorrow morning. Town Hall, above the Mercantile." Amelia smiled, grateful for the unspoken support. How convenient. Later, alone in her room, Amelia carefully counted out her money. Her own $17 and Thomas's $300. She separated $50, setting it aside for immediate needs, then concealed the rest in a hidden pocket she had sewn into her traveling coat. A woman alone learned to be cautious with her resources. Sleep came fitfully that night, her mind too occupied with possibilities and contingency plans to fully rest. By dawn, she was awake and dressed in her most professional attire, a navy blue traveling suit with a crisp white blouse, her hair neatly pinned in a modest yet flattering style. She packed her belongings efficiently, leaving out only what she would need for the day. Mrs. Winters provided a hearty breakfast and a knowing smile, but asked no questions about Amelia's plans. As promised, Jenkins was ready with the light wagon shortly after 7. "Into town, Miss Hayes?" he asked, helping her up to the seat beside him. "Yes, please," she confirmed. "I have business to attend to before the stage departs." Jenkins, a taciturn man of middle years, merely nodded and set the horses in motion. They travelled in companionable silence for most of the journey, the early morning air crisp and invigorating. Only as the town came into view did Jenkins speak again. "Heard you're heading to Denver," he remarked, keeping his eyes on the road. "That was the arrangement Mr. Blackwell made," Amelia replied carefully. Jenkins nodded slowly. "Denver's a fine city, growing fast, but Hawks Valley could use more educated folks, especially those willing to speak their minds." He glanced at her briefly. "Just an observation, ma'am." Amelia smiled, touched by this unexpected support from a man who had barely spoken 2 words to her before. "I appreciate the observation, Mr. Jenkins." He deposited her at the mercantile, tipping his hat before continuing to the feed store for his supplies. Amelia checked her pocket watch. 7:45. Perfect timing for the school board meeting. The mercantile was already busy with morning shoppers. Amelia nodded politely to the curious glances that followed her as she made her way to the staircase leading to the town hall above. She had no illusions about her current status in local gossip. The rejected mail-order bride of Thomas Blackwell was undoubtedly a subject of intense speculation. The town hall proved to be a large open room, with benches arranged in rows facing a raised platform where town business was conducted. At the front, a table had been set up where 5 men sat in conversation, the school board presumably. Amelia recognized Mayor Phillips from descriptions Mrs. Winters had provided. A portly man in his 50s with an impressive mustache and watch chain. Daniel Grant sat at the far end, his tall frame distinctive even at a distance. Several townspeople were already seated on the benches, mostly women who Amelia guessed were mothers, concerned about education resuming. She took a seat near the back, wanting to observe before making her presence known. At precisely 8 o'clock, Mayor Phillips called the meeting to order with a rap of his gavel. "First item of business, the continuing search for a school teacher," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the room. "As you all know, Mrs. Wilson's condition prevents her from continuing even her limited teaching duties. We've advertised in Denver and Cheyenne newspapers, but thus far have received no qualified applicants willing to relocate to our modest community." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled parents. "My Josephine has forgotten half her letters already," one woman complained. 3 months without proper schooling! Something must be done before winter," another insisted. "The children are falling behind." Mayor Phillips raised his hands placatingly. "The board shares your concerns, ladies. We're considering alternatives, perhaps bringing in a teacher from Cheyenne once a month for intensive lessons." "That's wholly inadequate," Daniel Grant interrupted, his deep voice cutting through the discussion. "Children need consistent daily instruction. We've discussed this repeatedly." The mayor's expression tightened with annoyance. "Unless you have a qualified teacher hidden in your pocket, Mr. Grant, such observations aren't helpful." Amelia rose from her seat, heart pounding but resolved firmly. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Perhaps I might offer a solution." All heads turned. Toward her, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to, in Daniel's case, stunned recognition. Miss Hayes? Mayor Phillips recovered first, clearly connecting her to the recent gossip. This is a closed board meeting. Though citizens may observe, I'm not here merely to observe, Amelia interrupted with calm confidence. I'm here to apply for the teaching position. A buzz of whispers swept through the room. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to something that might have been admiration. Mayor Phillips cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Hayes, while we appreciate your initiative, the position requires certain qualifications. I hold a teaching certificate. From the Massachusetts Board of Education, Amelia stated, approaching the board table. I taught for 3 years at the Darby School for Girls in Boston, specializing in literature, mathematics, and natural sciences. I can provide references attesting to my academic capabilities. The mayor blinked, clearly unprepared for her qualifications. I see, that's most impressive. However, there are other considerations, such as my association with Mr. Blackwell, Amelia suggested directly, addressing the unspoken concern. I assure you, gentlemen, that situation has been resolved. Mr. Blackwell and I mutually agreed that we were unsuited for matrimony. There is no ongoing connection between us. Even so, one of the other board members interjected, a young, unmarried woman living alone in our community might raise concerns about propriety. Amelia had anticipated this objection. I understand completely, which is why I would propose boarding with a respectable family in town, perhaps a widow or older couple. I would adhere to the strictest standards of behavior, as befits someone entrusted with children's education and moral development. She glanced toward the mothers in attendance, sensing potential allies. I believe most parents would prioritize their children receiving quality education over unfounded concerns about my personal circumstances. Hear, hear, one of the women called out, followed by murmurs of agreement from others. Daniel Grant leaned forward, addressing his fellow board members. Miss Hayes is exactly what we've been seeking, a qualified educator willing to come to our community. To reject her application based on gossip or outdated notions of propriety would be foolish, and contrary to the best interests of our children. Mayor Phillips' expression suggested he found the situation extremely uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwell is one of our most prominent citizens, he said, lowering his voice, though still audible to those nearby. He might object to this arrangement. Mr. Blackwell has no claim on Miss Hayes, nor authority over this board's decisions, Daniel countered firmly. Unless you're suggesting we need his permission to hire a qualified teacher. The challenge hung in the air, a test of the actual limits of Thomas's influence. Mayor Phillips shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, of course not. But as a courtesy, my stage to Denver departs at 9, gentlemen, Amelia interrupted, seeing the need to force a decision. If the board wishes to secure my services, we must reach an agreement now. Otherwise, I'll be on that stage as planned. The pressure of this deadline seemed to galvanize the board. They huddled together in hurried consultation, voices too low for Amelia to hear. Daniel remained slightly apart from the group, his gaze meeting hers briefly with unmistakable approval. After several tense minutes, Mayor Phillips addressed her. Again, Miss Hayes, the board would like to offer you the position of school teacher for Hawks Valley on a provisional basis for 1 term. Salary is $60 per month, with room and board to be arranged with a suitable family in town. The salary was fair, better than she had earned in Boston, in fact. The provisional status was a reasonable compromise, allowing the town to evaluate her performance before making a longer commitment. I accept your terms, gentlemen, Amelia replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the elation rising within her. When would you like me to begin? The schoolhouse needs preparation, one board member said. It's been closed for months. I can have it ready by Monday next, Amelia offered. That would give us time to notify families that classes will resume. Mayor Phillips nodded, seeming resigned to the situation, if not entirely comfortable with it. Very well. The board will arrange temporary lodging for you at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house until a more permanent arrangement can be secured. The matter settled, the meeting moved on to other town business. Amelia slipped out quietly, needing to retrieve her luggage from the stage office before the Denver coach departed, without her. Outside the Mercantile, the morning sun had risen fully, bathing the main street in golden light. Amelia took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She had done it, secured a position, established herself independently in this community, all through her own initiative and qualifications. Miss Hayes. She turned to find Daniel Grant descending the stairs behind her, his expression a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Mr. Grant," she acknowledged with a smile she couldn't suppress. "I confess I didn't expect to see you at that meeting," he said, falling into step beside her as she walked toward the stage office. "Blackwell seemed quite determined about your departure." "Mr. Blackwell made arrangements based on his assumptions about my character and desires," Amelia replied. "He failed to consult me on whether those arrangements aligned with my own plans." Daniel's laugh was genuine, his admiration unconcealed. "Remarkable. He must be furious." "He doesn't know yet," Amelia admitted, "though I imagine word will reach him quickly enough." They reached the stage office, where Amelia identified her trunks to the attendant, explaining they would not be traveling to Denver after all. As the man carried them to a storage area, she turned back to Daniel. "Thank you for your support with the school board," she said sincerely. "I suspect, without your advocacy, they might have found my situation too unconventional." The board needed a qualified teacher more than they needed to maintain outdated social conventions, Daniel replied with a shrug. "I merely pointed out the obvious. Nevertheless, I appreciate it." She hesitated, then asked, "Why did you join the school board? Mrs. Winters mentioned you only agreed recently." A shadow crossed his expression. "My father valued education above almost everything. He believed it was the key to progress, to building a better society than the one he knew. When I saw the school faltering, I felt obligated to help, despite my complicated relationship with town leadership." The simple explanation revealed more about Daniel Grant's character than a dozen longer conversations might have. Here was a man guided by principles rather than social convenience or personal advantage. "Your father would be proud, I think," Amelia said softly. Something in Daniel's expression opened at her words, vulnerability briefly visible before he composed himself. "I hope so." He glanced toward the town hall. "The board meeting will continue for some time. May I walk you to Mrs. Henderson's? Her boarding house is just past the church." "Thank you. That would be most helpful," Amelia accepted. As they walked side by side down Hawks Valley's main street, Amelia was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted. The rejected bride of Thomas Blackwell strolling companionably. With his known rival, it would fuel gossip for weeks. "People are watching us," she observed quietly. "People always watch in small towns," Daniel replied unconcerned. "It's their primary entertainment. It might make my position here more difficult if I'm immediately associated with you, given your history with Mr. Blackwell." Daniel slowed his pace, looking at her with sudden seriousness. "Miss Hayes, Amelia, if my company compromises your standing in the community, I'll understand your need to maintain distance." The offer touched her deeply. His willingness to prioritize her security over his own inclinations spoke volumes. "I appreciate your consideration," she said carefully, "but I won't build a life here based on others' expectations or judgments. I value honesty and integrity over social convenience, qualities you seem to embody, Mr. Grant." His expression warmed at her words. "Daniel, please." and I'm grateful for your perspective. Too few share it. They had reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a neat, two-story building with lace curtains and a well-tended garden. Before they could approach the door, it opened to reveal a plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 60s. "Mr. Grant," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mayor Phillips just sent word you'd be bringing our new school teacher." Her keen eyes assessed Amelia with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Hayes, is it? The mayor mentioned you'd need accommodations until more permanent arrangements can be made." "That's correct, Mrs. Henderson," Amelia confirmed. "I hope it's not an imposition." "Not at all, dear. We've been desperate for a proper teacher." "I have. 2 grandchildren who need education, something fierce." She beckoned them inside. Come in, come in. I've got coffee brewing and fresh biscuits just out of the oven." As they followed Mrs. Henderson into her tidy parlour, Daniel leaned close to murmur in Amelia's ear, "Be prepared for intense questioning. Martha Henderson is the sweetest soul in Wyoming territory, but also the most determinedly curious." Amelia suppressed a smile. "I think I can manage." "I have no doubt," he replied, and the warmth in his voice suggested he meant far more than her ability to handle a landlady's questions. For a moment, their eyes met in shared understanding, 2 independent spirits recognizing something kindred in each other. Whatever came next, Amelia realized she had found at least one true ally in Hawks Valley, and perhaps, in time, something more. Word traveled quickly in Hawks Valley. By afternoon, it seemed everyone knew that Miss Amelia Hayes, Thomas Blackwell's rejected bride-to-be, had been hired as the town's new schoolteacher. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house became a revolving door of visitors, mothers eager to meet, their children's new teacher, town matrons sizing up the newcomer, and the merely curious hoping for gossip about her broken engagement. Amelia met them all with composed dignity, redirecting conversations from her personal circumstances to her educational philosophy and plans for the school. By evening, she had scheduled a community meeting for Saturday to discuss the curriculum and address parents' concerns before classes began on Monday. "You've handled the onslaught admirably," Mrs. Henderson remarked, as they shared a quiet supper after the last visitor departed. "Most newcomers would have been overwhelmed. Boston society prepared me well for interrogation disguised as polite conversation," Amelia replied with a wry smile. "Though I admit the openness here is rather refreshing compared to New England." "Reserve," Mrs. Henderson chuckled. "Folks here speak their minds for better or worse. No time for pretense when survival requires cooperation." She poured more tea for them both. "Speaking of speaking one's mind, Thomas Blackwell came by while you were meeting with Reverend Porter." Amelia's hand stilled momentarily. "Did he? I'm sorry to have missed him." "No, you're not," Mrs. Henderson countered with surprising frankness. "And neither was he, I suspect. He merely left word that your trunks and remaining belongings have been delivered to the stagecoach office. Said you could collect them at your convenience." "That was considerate of him." Mrs. Henderson's expression suggested she had opinions on Thomas's level of consideration, but was too polite to voice them. "He seemed rather formal. Didn't ask to wait for your return." Amelia wasn't surprised. Thomas would feel humiliated. His carefully arranged plans dismissed, his judgment questioned. A direct confrontation would only deepen his embarrassment. "Mr. Blackwell and I have said our goodbyes," she said simply. "There's little left to discuss between us." Mrs. Henderson nodded, accepting this explanation without pressing further, a restraint Amelia appreciated. "Well, you've had a full day. Tomorrow will be busy too, with the schoolhouse needing attention before Monday. You should rest," Amelia agreed, retiring to the comfortable guest room Mrs. Henderson had prepared. Through the window, she could see Hawks Valley's main street. Now quiet as evening settled over the town, Lamplight glowed in the windows. Shopkeepers closed their businesses, and a few men ambled toward the saloon for evening refreshment. This would be her home now, not as Thomas Blackwell's wife, relegated to supporting his ambitions, but as an independent woman with her own purpose and standing. The thought brought a profound sense of satisfaction. As Amelia prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at her door. Mrs. Henderson stood outside, holding a folded note. "Almost forgot. This came for you earlier. Young Miguel delivered it." "Miguel?" Amelia echoed, surprised. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." Alone again, she unfolded the note, recognizing Daniel Grant's bold handwriting. "Miss Hayes, several of us will be at the schoolhouse tomorrow morning at 8 to help with cleaning and repairs. Miguel mentioned you're handy with tools as well as books. We could use your direction on what needs addressing first." Respectfully, Daniel Grant Amelia smiled at the simple message. Daniel had correctly intuited she'd want to be involved in the schoolhouse preparations, not merely arrive once others had completed the work. His acknowledgement of her practical abilities, mentioned casually to Miguel during their brief interactions, suggested he truly saw her as a capable partner in the community's educational endeavors, not merely a decorative female figurehead. Sleep came easily that night, her mind at peace with her decision. Morning brought clear skies and refreshing autumn crispness as Amelia walked the short distance to the schoolhouse, located at the eastern edge of town beside a small grove of cottonwood trees. The building itself was sturdy if plain. A single, large room with tall windows and a bell tower, typical of frontier schools. As she approached, Amelia saw several horses and a wagon already tethered outside. True to his word, Daniel had assembled a work party that included Miguel, Luis, and several town residents she hadn't yet met. "Miss Hayes!" Miguel spotted her first, raising a hand in greeting. "We are just beginning." Daniel emerged from the schoolhouse, carpenter's apron around his waist and a broom in hand. "Good morning," he called, his smile genuine. "Hope you don't mind the head start." "Not at all," Amelia replied, returning his smile. "I'm grateful for the help." Daniel introduced the others. Mr. Perkins, the blacksmith, who had volunteered to repair broken hinges and latches. Mrs. Cooper and her teenage daughter Rebecca, who were washing windows. And Mr. Simmons, a retired carpenter working on damaged desks. "Quite the community effort," Amelia observed, touched by their willingness to help. "Everyone has a stake in the school," Daniel replied. "These folks all have children or grandchildren who'll be in your classroom." Inside, the schoolhouse showed signs of neglect. Dust covered every surface. A few windows were cracked, desks needed repair, and the cast-iron stove required cleaning before winter arrived. But the structure itself was sound. The blackboard, intact, and bookshelves along one wall held a modest collection of texts. "What do you think?" Daniel asked, watching her assess the space. "It has excellent bones," Amelia replied honestly. "Good light, sufficient room for up to 30 students. With some care, it will serve the purpose beautifully." The group worked efficiently throughout the morning. Amelia rolled up her sleeves, donning an apron Mrs. Cooper offered, and tackled the bookshelves, cataloguing the available texts, organizing them by subject, and making note of critical gaps in the collection. As they worked, conversation flowed easily. Amelia learned more about the town and its inhabitants from these casual exchanges than from all of Thomas's formal descriptions in his letters. She discovered which children might need extra attention, which families valued education most highly, and which subjects had been neglected under previous instructors. "Most of the older boys only attend during winter months," Mrs. Cooper explained as they scrubbed desks together. "They're needed for ranch work the rest of the year." "I understand the practical necessity," Amelia replied, "though I hope to convince some families of the value in more consistent attendance." "Good luck with that," Mrs. Cooper snorted. "Ranchers prioritize immediate needs over future benefits." "Some do," Daniel interjected, passing by with a ladder to repair the bell rope. "Others understand that educated children become more capable adults." My father insisted I attend school year-round, even when neighboring ranchers criticized him for wasting good working hours. And you went to college, Miguel added with evident admiration. Harvard University. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed by this mention of his education. My father believed knowledge was as valuable as land, the one thing that couldn't be taken from you. A wise perspective, Amelia remarked, impressed by this glimpse into the values that had shaped him. By midday, the transformation was remarkable. Floors swept and mopped, windows gleaming, desks repaired and arranged in orderly rows, stove blackened and ready for winter, fresh chalk and erasers by the cleaned blackboard. What had seemed a daunting task that morning had become, through many willing hands, a space ready to welcome eager young minds. Mrs. Cooper and Rebecca departed to prepare lunch, returning an hour later with baskets of food for the entire work party. They spread blankets under the cottonwood trees, enjoying a picnic in the pleasant autumn sunshine. Amelia found herself seated beside Daniel, both of them leaning against a broad tree trunk as they ate Mrs. Cooper's excellent fried chicken and biscuits. I've been meaning to ask, Daniel said, keeping his voice low enough for privacy despite the group around them. What changed your mind about Denver? When we parted yesterday, you seemed resigned to leaving. Amelia considered her answer carefully. Several factors influenced my decision. Learning about the town's need for a teacher, certainly. But more fundamentally, she paused, organizing her thoughts. I realized I was allowing others to dictate my path. First the headmaster in Boston, who dismissed me for my progressive methods. Then Thomas, who rejected me for expressing my opinions too freely. She met his gaze directly. I decided it was time to determine my own course, to build a life based on my capabilities rather than others' expectations. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Taking control of your own destiny. There's nothing more essentially Western than that. A smile touched his mouth. Though I suspect Thomas Blackwell wasn't pleased to have his carefully arranged plans disregarded. I imagine not, Amelia agreed, though he's been civil about it. My belongings were delivered to the stage office without incident. Blackwell values appearances above all else, Daniel observed. He'll maintain a gentlemanly facade publicly, whatever his private feelings. Amelia studied Daniel's expression, sensing the deeper history between the two men. Mrs. Winters mentioned the water dispute between your fathers. That must have been difficult for both families. Daniel's face grew somber. My father's death was complicated. The argument with Blackwell's father didn't directly cause his heart failure. The doctor said it had been weakening for years. But the stress of that confrontation certainly didn't help. He absently traced patterns in the dirt beside their blanket. I was at Harvard when it happened, didn't even make it home for the funeral. I'm sorry, Amelia said softly, understanding. The weight of such absence. She had at least been present when illness took her parents. Thomas and I had been friends as boys, Daniel continued, surprising her with this revelation. Not close, perhaps. His family was always wealthier, more established. But we'd gone fishing together and attended the same small schoolhouse that existed before this one was built. What changed between you beyond the tragedy? Daniel considered this. Values, I suppose. I returned from college with ideas about modern agriculture, fair treatment of workers, equal opportunity regardless of background. Thomas doubled down on traditional hierarchies, white men at the top, everyone else serving their interests. He shrugged. Oil and water. This explanation aligned with Amelia's own observations of both men. Thomas represented the established order, comfortable within rigid social structures. Daniel embodied a more progressive vision, valuing merit over tradition. Their conversation was interrupted as Mr. Perkins approached, needing Daniel's help with the bell mechanism. Amelia watched as he rose smoothly, moving to assist with practiced competence. There was nothing of the entitled rancher about him. He worked alongside everyone else. His Harvard education evidenced more in his ideas than his heirs. The afternoon passed quickly, with final touches to the schoolhouse. By 4 o'clock the transformation was complete. Amelia stood in the doorway, surveying what would become her domain on Monday morning. "It looks wonderful," she said to the assembled helpers. "I can't thank you all enough for your efforts. Will you need anything else before Monday?" Daniel asked as the others began packing up tools and cleaning supplies. "Just to retrieve my teaching materials from my trunks," Amelia replied, "and to finalize the curriculum based on what I've learned about the students' needs. I can drive. You to the stage office now if you'd like," Daniel offered. "My wagon's outside." Amelia accepted gratefully. After bidding farewell to the other volunteers, she joined Daniel in his wagon for the short ride to the stage office where her belongings awaited. The station manager, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, raised his eyebrows as they entered together. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged, "and Mr. Grant, your trunks are in the storeroom, miss. Need help getting them loaded?" "Yes, please," Amelia replied, ignoring his curious glance between her and Daniel. As the manager disappeared into the back room, Daniel leaned close. "Town gossip will have us courting by supper time," he murmured, amusement in his voice. "I suspect. Town gossip had us courting the moment I didn't board the Denver stage," Amelia returned dryly. Daniel's laugh was warm and genuine. "True enough. Small towns excel at connecting dots that don't necessarily exist." "Does that concern you?" she asked, curious about his perspective. He considered her question seriously. "I've learned to be selective about which opinions matter to me. Those who would judge you, or me, based on gossip rather than character, aren't people whose approval I particularly value." It was a liberating viewpoint, one Amelia found herself sharing increasingly. A healthy perspective. Their conversation paused as the manager returned with the first of her trunks, which Daniel helped load into his wagon. Once her belongings were secured, they headed toward Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. "I've been thinking about your book collection at the schoolhouse," Daniel said as they drove. "It's sadly lacking in several areas, particularly natural sciences and contemporary literature." "I noticed that as well," Amelia agreed. "The mathematics texts are woefully outdated too. I have duplicates of several scientific volumes, Darwin, Huxley, Gray's botanical works, also some Dickens, Eliot and Thoreau. You'd be welcome to them for your classroom." Amelia glanced at him, surprised by the offer and the caliber of reading material. "That's extraordinarily generous. Are you certain you can spare them?" "My father believed in building libraries," Daniel replied with a small smile. "I've continued the tradition. My collection would benefit more students in the schoolhouse than gathering dust on my shelves." As they approached Mrs. Henderson's, Amelia spotted a familiar figure on the porch. Thomas Blackwell, dressed formally as always, his expression tightening as he recognized Daniel's wagon. "It seems Mr. Blackwell has returned to speak with you. After all," Daniel observed quietly. Amelia straightened her shoulders, mentally preparing for the confrontation. "So it seems." Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop. "Would you prefer I leave you to speak with him privately?" "No," Amelia decided after a moment's consideration. "There's nothing between Mr. Blackwell and me that requires privacy. You've kindly helped with my trunks. It would be illogical for you to leave before they're unloaded." A flicker of admiration crossed Daniel's face at her practical approach. He helped her down from the wagon, then turned to address Thomas with civil neutrality. "Blackwell." "Grant," Thomas replied stiffly, his gaze shifting between them before settling on Amelia. "Miss Hayes, I had hoped to speak with you. Privately," he added pointedly. "Mr. Grant has been kind enough to transport my belongings from the stage office." Amelia explained. "Perhaps you could help us unload them, and then we can speak on the porch." Thomas clearly hadn't expected to be pressed into manual labor, but refusing would appear ungentlemanly. With visible reluctance, he descended the porch steps to assist. The tension between the two men was palpable as they worked, though both maintained outward civility. When the trunks were safely inside Mrs. Henderson's parlor, Daniel tipped his hat politely. "Miss Hayes, I'll bring those books by the schoolhouse tomorrow, if that's convenient." "Perfectly convenient, thank you," Amelia replied warmly. "And thank you again for all your assistance today." After Daniel departed, Amelia turned to Thomas, gesturing toward the porch chairs. "Shall we?" Once seated, Thomas wasted no time addressing the situation. "I understand you've accepted the teaching position here," he began, his tone carefully controlled, "despite our agreement regarding Denver." "Your arrangement, Mr. Blackwell," Amelia corrected gently. "Not our agreement. I never explicitly consented to your plan." Thomas's jaw tightened momentarily before he mastered his expression. "Nevertheless, I provided funds for your relocation to Denver. Funds you accepted." "Yes," Amelia acknowledged. $300, far more than necessary for a simple journey. I interpreted the excess as compensation for the inconvenience of our failed arrangement, not as payment for following your specific instructions." A flush crept up Thomas's neck. "That was not my intention." "Then I misunderstood," Amelia replied calmly. "I'm happy to return the funds, of course." "That won't be necessary," Thomas said stiffly. "I'm not so petty as to demand their return." An awkward silence fell between them. Amelia waited, sensing Thomas had more to say, but was struggling to articulate it. "Your association with Daniel Grant is unwise," he finally stated. "The man holds radical views that make him an outsider in this community. Aligning yourself with him could compromise your position as teacher. Mr. Grant has been extraordinarily helpful in preparing the schoolhouse," Amelia replied, keeping her tone neutral. "He sits on the school board and clearly values education highly. I see no reason to reject his assistance based on personal rivalries I have no part in." Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You don't understand the history between us." "I understand enough," Amelia interrupted gently. "I know about the water dispute, your father's confrontation, and Mr. Grant's subsequent death. I know you and Daniel were childhood friends before. Circumstances and differing values separated you." Surprise flickered across Thomas's face. "Grant told you this?" "Some." Mrs. Winters provided context as well. Amelia met his gaze directly. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your concern for my position here, but I must establish myself based on my own judgment of character and situation, not inherited grievances." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You truly are remarkably outspoken, Miss Hayes." "Yes," she agreed simply. "It's fundamental to who I am, something you found objectionable in a potential wife but might appreciate in a teacher committed to educating this community's children properly." A reluctant smile touched Thomas's mouth. "Perhaps." He rose, straightening his jacket with habitual precision. "I won't take more of your time. I merely wanted to ensure you understood the complexities of the situation you've entered." Amelia stood as well. "I appreciate the warning, though I believe I'm capable of navigating those complexities." Thomas hesitated at the top of the porch steps. "One last thing. I've established a small scholarship fund for the school. It seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Mayor Phillips will provide details at the next town council meeting." The gesture surprised Amelia. It suggested a capacity for growth she hadn't expected from him. "That's remarkably generous, Mr. Blackwell. The children will benefit greatly." Thomas nodded once, his expression unreadable, then descended the steps and walked to where his horse waited. Amelia watched him ride away, reflecting on the complex man she had nearly married. Rigid in his expectations, yet capable of generosity. Traditional in his views, yet willing to support education, even when it no longer served his immediate interests. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting Hawkes Valley in gold and amber, Amelia felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead wouldn't be without challenges. Establishing herself as an educator, navigating small-town politics, and perhaps exploring the unexpected connection with Daniel Grant. But it was a path of her own choosing, not one dictated by others' expectations or limitations. For a woman once rejected for being too outspoken, there could be no greater victory than finding a community where that very quality might become her greatest strength. 3 months passed swiftly. Autumn's gold gave way to winter's white as Hawkes Valley settled into the rhythm of the colder season. The school flourished under Amelia's guidance, her progressive teaching methods winning over even the most skeptical parents as their children returned home excited about learning for perhaps the first time. She had moved from Mrs. Henderson's boarding house into the small but comfortable apartment above the millinery shop, giving her independence while maintaining propriety in the eyes of the community. The space suited her perfectly. 2 tidy rooms with large windows overlooking the main street, providing both privacy and connection to town life. On this particular December morning, Amelia rose early, despite the biting cold. The winter term would end tomorrow for the Christmas holiday, and she had planned special activities for her students last day before the 2-week break. Stoking the small stove to warm her rooms, she dressed quickly in a practical wool dress and sturdy boots before wrapping herself in the fur-lined cloak that had been a gift from her students' parents, a touching demonstration of their appreciation. The street below was quiet, dusted with fresh snow that glittered in the early morning light. Amelia paused at her window, admiring the transformed landscape. Wyoming winters had proven harsher than Boston's, but there was a stark beauty to the season here that she found compelling. The crystalline air, the dramatic contrast of white snow against distant purple mountains. As she prepared to leave, a movement in the street caught her attention. Daniel Grant was tethering his horse outside the general store, his tall figure distinctive, even bundled against the cold. Over the past months, their friendship had deepened through regular interactions, school board meetings, community gatherings, and occasionally shared meals at the town's small restaurant. Nothing improper had occurred between them, but Amelia was too honest with herself to deny the growing warmth she felt in his presence. Daniel treated her neither as a delicate flower to be sheltered, nor as merely a functional educator, but as an equal mind with valuable perspectives. Their conversations ranged from educational philosophy to agricultural innovations, literature to territorial politics. In him, she had found that rarest of gifts, a man who valued her intellect as much as her company. Impulsively, Amelia opened her window and called down, "Good morning, Mr. Grant." Daniel looked up, surprise giving way to a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Miss Hayes, you're abroad early today." "Last day of term," she explained. "Much to prepare before the students arrive." "Ah, of course." He glanced toward the schoolhouse, then back at her. "I was about to have breakfast at Mrs. Brown's cafe. Would you care to join me before your preparations?" The invitation was simply offered, without pressure or hidden motive. "I'd like that," Amelia replied. "I'll be down directly." Mrs. Brown's cafe was warm and fragrant with the smells of coffee, baking biscuits and fried bacon. Only a few early risers occupied the tables: the blacksmith, a rancher in town for supplies, and the stagecoach driver waiting for the morning departure. Daniel secured a table near the window as Amelia entered, removing her cloak and gloves. Mrs. Brown herself bustled over with coffee, her round face beaming. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Grant, breakfast for 2 this morning?" "Please," Daniel confirmed, "whatever's hot and plentiful." As Mrs. Brown returned to her kitchen, Daniel turned to Amelia. You seem especially cheerful this morning, despite the cold. I've planned something special for the students today, she explained, warming her hands around the coffee cup. A celebration of their progress this term. They've certainly thrived under your guidance, Daniel observed. Even my ranch hands with children mention the difference they've seen. Young Timothy Miller is reading to his father every evening. Now, a complete reversal from a boy who used to hide his books under the barn floorboards. Amelia smiled, pleased by this report. Timothy has extraordinary potential. All he needed was encouragement rather than criticism of his reading difficulties. Their breakfast arrived, generous plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them, touching on the upcoming holiday celebrations, the unusually heavy snowfall predicted for January, and the spring planting Daniel was already planning. I've ordered new seed varieties from back east, he explained, enthusiasm lighting his features. Drought-resistant wheat that should thrive even in our driest years. If successful, it could transform ranching operations throughout the territory. Always. The innovator, Amelia remarked with affectionate teasing. What does Thomas think of your experimental agriculture? Daniel's expression turned wry. Blackwell maintains that traditional methods have served well enough for generations. Why risk change when the old ways are proven? The eternal debate between you two, Amelia noted, tradition versus progress. In the months since her arrival, Thomas had maintained civil but distant relations with Amelia. They encountered each other at town functions and church services, exchanging polite greetings but little more. His scholarship fund for the school had proven generous, providing books and supplies that might otherwise have been beyond the town's budget, though he rarely inquired directly about its impact. Speaking of Blackwell, Daniel said, interrupting her thoughts, have you heard he's engaged? Amelia's eyebrows rose in surprise. No, to whom? Margaret Sheffield, a banker's daughter from Cheyenne, very proper, very traditional, and reportedly comes with a substantial dowry. Daniel studied her reaction carefully. Does that trouble you? Not in the least, Amelia replied honestly. I'm pleased he's found someone more suited to his expectations. When is the wedding? Spring, from what I hear. A grand affair in Cheyenne, naturally. Amelia nodded, genuinely happy that Thomas had found a match more aligned with his values. Their brief courtship felt like a lifetime ago now, a detour that had ultimately led her to where she truly belonged. After breakfast, Daniel walked her to the schoolhouse, carrying a package he'd retrieved from his saddlebags. A contribution to your end-of-term celebrations, he explained, handing it to her at the schoolhouse steps. Inside the package, Amelia found 24 candy sticks in various flavors and colors. The children will be delighted, she said, touched. I'll see you at the Christmas pageant tomorrow evening. Of course, the children have been practicing their recitations for weeks. They parted companionably, Daniel returning to his errands in town, while Amelia prepared the schoolroom for the day's festivities. She arranged the candy sticks in a decorative jar on her desk, positioned art supplies at each student's place, and hung the handmade decorations they'd created throughout the term. The school day passed in a blur of activity, holiday recitations, art projects, simple science demonstrations, and finally the distribution of Daniel's candy sticks to wide-eyed children unaccustomed to such treats. As the last student departed, calling cheerful holiday wishes over her shoulder, Amelia began tidying the classroom with a satisfied heart. A knock at the door interrupted her work. Looking up, she was surprised to see Mayor Phillips standing awkwardly in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Mayor Phillips," she greeted him, "what brings you to the schoolhouse this afternoon?" "Official business, Miss Hayes," he replied, his expression unusually serious. "Might I have a word?" "Of course." Amelia gestured to a chair near her desk, concerned about his formal manner. "Is something wrong?" The mayor settled his substantial frame into the child-sized chair with visible discomfort, both physical and emotional. "Not wrong precisely, but potentially complicated." Amelia waited, maintaining a calm exterior despite her growing apprehension. "The school board met this morning," he began, tugging at his collar. "Special session, called by Thomas Blackwell." "I see," Amelia said carefully. "Regarding what matters?" "Your situation." Mayor Phillips couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Mr. Blackwell expressed concerns about your living arrangements. As an unmarried woman living alone, he suggested there might be appearances to consider for the school's reputation." Indignation flared in Amelia's chest, but she controlled her expression. "My living arrangements have been entirely proper these past months. I maintain a respectable residence and conduct myself with complete propriety." "Yes, yes," the mayor hurried to agree. "No one is suggesting otherwise, but Mr. Blackwell pointed out that your friendship with Daniel Grant has become the subject of some talk. Nothing scandalous," he added quickly, seeing her expression darken. "But in a small town, even innocent associations can lead to speculation." "I see," Amelia said again, her voice cooler now. "And what was the board's conclusion?" "Regarding these concerns," Mayor Phillips shifted uncomfortably, "the board values your contributions enormously, Miss Hayes. The children have shown remarkable progress under your instruction. However, Amelia prompted when he faltered. "However, there was agreement that certain formalizations might be advisable for appearance's sake." "Formalizations," Amelia repeated. "Please speak plainly, Mayor Phillips. What exactly is being requested of me?" The mayor took a deep breath. "The board suggests that by the start of the next term, you should either secure lodging with a respectable family rather than living independently, or—" He trailed off again. "Or," Amelia pressed, suspecting what was coming, "or formalize your relationship with Mr. Grant, if that is your preference." Mayor Phillips finally met her gaze. "In plain terms, Miss Hayes, the board believes you should either live under the supervision of a family or marry, for the school's sake." There it was, the ultimatum lurking beneath the surface. Amelia felt a surge of the same indignation that had cost her her position in Boston. Once again, her professional capabilities were being tied to her personal choices rather than her merit as an educator. "I see," she said for the third time, but with a deliberate calmness that made the mayor fidget further. "And who voted in favor of this suggestion?" "It was not unanimous," Mayor Phillips admitted. "Mr. Grant opposed it vehemently, of course, called it medieval thinking. Mrs. Thompson abstained. The rest of us felt it was a reasonable compromise." "A compromise between what positions, exactly?" The mayor looked uncomfortable again. "Between those who value your contributions and those who feel that traditional proprieties should be maintained. I assume Mr. Blackwell represented the latter position. He was most articulate in his concerns," Mayor Phillips acknowledged. Amelia stood, needing movement to channel her frustration. She paced to the window, looking out at the snow-covered schoolyard where her students had been playing just hours earlier. "Mayor Phillips," she said finally, turning back to him, "I must say I find this development disappointing. My living arrangements have no bearing on my ability to educate this town's children. My friendship with Mr. Grant is entirely proper and has never once interfered with my professional responsibilities. No, One is questioning your abilities, Miss Hayes, the mayor insisted. It's merely a matter of appearances, Amelia finished for him. Yes, I understand perfectly. The substance of my work matters less than conforming to traditional expectations about a woman's place in independence. Mayor Phillips had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. When you put it that way, it sounds rather backward. But you must understand the realities of a small community like ours. Certain traditions and expectations run deep. I understand those. Realities better than you might imagine, Amelia replied. I'll need time to consider my response to the board's suggestion. Of course, the mayor agreed, rising with evident relief that the conversation was concluding. Take the holiday period to reflect. No decision is needed until the new term begins. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Hayes, I personally hope you'll find a way to remain with us. The school has never been in better hands. After he departed, Amelia sank into her chair, emotions warring within her, anger at the unfairness of the ultimatum, disappointment that the community she'd grown to love still held such regressive views, and something more complex when she considered the second option the board had offered, formalizing her relationship with Daniel. They had grown close over these months, certainly. Their shared values, mutual respect, and undeniable attraction had created a foundation that might, indeed, support something more formal. But marriage, based not on their own timeline, but on the town's expectations. The thought rankled deeply. Amelia remained at her desk until the winter sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the schoolroom floor. Finally, she gathered her belongings and wrapped her cloak tightly around herself before stepping into the crisp evening air. Rather than turning toward her apartment, she found herself walking to the edge of town, where the open landscape stretched toward the distant Grant Ranch. The snow crunched beneath her boots, the only sound in the stillness of early evening. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she stood contemplating the sprawling territory beyond the town limits, its vastness both intimidating and exhilarating. She had come to Wyoming seeking security through marriage, only to find a different kind of security in her own capabilities. Now that independence was being challenged again, forced into traditional constraints by a community that valued conformity over merit. Miss Hayes? She turned to find Daniel approaching on horseback, evidently returning from town. He dismounted quickly, concern evident in his expression as he led his horse toward her. Is something wrong? It's dangerously cold to be standing out here without purpose. The school board met today, Amelia said without preamble. Mayor Phillips just informed me of their suggestion regarding my living arrangements. Daniel's expression darkened immediately. I'd hoped he might delay that conversation until after the holidays at least. You knew he was coming to speak with me? I knew it was likely, Daniel admitted. After the meeting, I had business to attend to that couldn't wait. I planned to warn you this evening. He studied her face with concern. How are you feeling about their ultimatum? Frustrated, disappointed, unsurprised, Amelia listed with brutal honesty. It seems I cannot escape judgment based on conventional expectations rather than actual conduct. Daniel's jaw tightened. It's unjust and backward. Your teaching has transformed this community's children. That should be all that matters. Should be, Amelia agreed with a sad smile. But rarely is, when it comes to women stepping beyond traditional boundaries. The cold was intensifying as twilight deepened. Daniel gestured toward town. You shouldn't remain out here in this temperature. May I walk you back to your apartment? Amelia nodded, grateful for his company as they turned back toward the glowing windows of Hawks Valley. They walked in companionable silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. What will you do? Daniel finally asked as they neared the town. Limits? I haven't decided, Amelia replied honestly. I'm not inclined to surrender my independence merely to satisfy outdated notions of propriety, but I've grown to love teaching these children. Leaving would be painful. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her directly. In the fading light, his expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. You know there's another option. Amelia met his gaze steadily. Marriage, you mean? Based not on our own choices and timing, but on the board's ultimatum. The timing is unfortunate, Daniel acknowledged, but don't mistake that for lack of genuine feeling. The simple statement hung in the cold air between them, neither a declaration nor a proposal, but an acknowledgement of what had been growing between them these past months. Daniel, Amelia began carefully, I value what we've built together too much to have it forced by external pressures. Marriage should be a choice made freely, not a solution to a problem imposed by others. I agree completely, he said, surprising her, which is why I'm not proposing to you right now, despite what I may feel. A half-smile touched his mouth. I respect you too much to have our relationship defined by Thomas Blackwell's manipulations. Relief washed through Amelia, followed by something warmer. Here again was evidence of why she had grown to care so deeply for this man, his unfailing respect for her autonomy and dignity. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. They resumed walking, reaching the main street where lamps had been lit against the gathering darkness. Outside her apartment building, they paused again. Will you attend the board's next meeting? Daniel asked. I think they should hear directly from you before making any final decisions. Amelia considered this. Yes, I believe that would be appropriate. They should understand exactly what they're risking with this ultimatum. Daniel nodded approvingly. I'll ensure you're notified of the date. And Amelia, he hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. Whatever you decide, know that you have my complete support. Your independence matters to me as much as your presence here. The simple statement, so contrary to what most men of the era would express, touched her deeply. That means more than I can adequately express. With a respectful nod, Daniel left her at her door, continuing down the street toward the livery, where he'd stable his horse before returning to his ranch. Amelia watched him go, her heart full of conflicting emotions, but her mind increasingly clear about what she must do. The next evening brought the school's Christmas pageant, held in the town's small church. Every pew was filled with proud parents and community members as children recited poems, sang carols, and enacted a simple nativity play that Amelia had organized. From her position near the front, guiding the younger children through their parts, Amelia was acutely aware of the community surrounding her. The families whose lives she had touched, the bonds she had formed, the difference she had made in just 3 short months. The thought of leaving created a physical ache in her chest. After the final carol, Reverend Porter invited everyone to the church hall for refreshments. As the crowd dispersed, Amelia found herself approached by several school board members, including Mayor Phillips, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Wonderful pageant, Miss Hayes, he offered, with forced cheerfulness. The children performed admirably. Thank you, Amelia replied politely. They worked very hard. An awkward silence fell, broken finally by Mrs. Thompson, the only female board member. Miss Hayes, I want you to know I oppose the board's position regarding your living situation. Your contribution to this community is too valuable to be jeopardized by outdated thinking. The direct support from an unexpected quarter strengthened Amelia's resolve. I appreciate that, Mrs. Thompson. Perhaps you'll attend the next board meeting. I plan to address this matter directly. Of course, Mrs. Thompson agreed, while Mayor Phillips looked increasingly distressed. Miss Hayes, he began, perhaps we could discuss this privately? I believe public matters should be addressed publicly, Mayor, Amelia interrupted gently but firmly. The board made a decision affecting my professional standing based on my personal choices. I intend to respond with the same transparency." The mayor seemed about to protest further when murmurs from nearby signaled a new arrival. Thomas Blackwell entered the church hall, impeccably dressed as always, with a stylishly attired young woman on his arm. Margaret Sheffield, Amelia presumed, his new fiancée. Thomas spotted their group and approached with confident strides, his expression neutral but watchful. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her with formal courtesy. "The pageant was most impressive. Allow me to introduce Miss Sheffield." Margaret Sheffield was everything Amelia was not: demure, traditionally feminine, and clearly comfortable with the social expectations of her position. She offered Amelia a polite smile. "I've heard wonderful things about your teaching, Miss Hayes. Thomas says the school has never been in better hands." This unexpected praise from Thomas himself caught Amelia off guard. "That's kind of him to say." An uncomfortable silence descended as the unspoken tensions between all parties seemed to fill the air. It was Daniel's arrival that broke the impasse as he joined their circle with easy confidence. "Miss Hayes, the children were exceptional tonight," he said warmly, before acknowledging the others with polite nods. "Blackwell, Miss Sheffield, Mayor." Thomas's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at Daniel's appearance. "Grant, enjoying the festivities?" "Very much," Daniel replied easily. "Our community is fortunate to have a teacher who brings out such talent in its children." The pointed comment hung in the air, its implication clear to all present. Thomas's jaw worked briefly before he turned to Amelia. "Miss Hayes, might I have a private word?" Surprised by the request, Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." They moved to a quiet corner of the hall, away from curious ears. Thomas seemed uncharacteristically uncertain, adjusting his cufflinks repeatedly before speaking. "I understand Mayor Phillips has conveyed the board's concerns regarding your living arrangements." "He has," Amelia confirmed, keeping her tone neutral. Thomas met her gaze directly. "The suggestion was mine, as you've likely surmised." "I had indeed surmised that," Amelia replied dryly, "though I confess I'm curious about your motivations, given that my personal choices no longer affect you directly." A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Thomas's expression. "My motivations are not vindictive, despite what Grant likely believes. The school thrives under your guidance. That much is evident to anyone with eyes to see. But this, community values, certain traditions, certain appearances, even when those traditions limit qualified women from living independently?" Amelia challenged quietly. "Especially then," Thomas replied with unexpected candor. "Change comes slowly here. Miss Hayes, too slowly perhaps for someone of your progressive mindset. But it does come, eventually." He glanced across the room to where Daniel stood in conversation with several parents. "Grant understands this territory's potential for evolution better than most. It's one of the few things we agree upon, though. Our methods differ considerably." Amelia studied him, sensing an olive branch of sorts in his words. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Blackwell?" "Merely that there are multiple paths to achieving your goals," Thomas said carefully. "Sometimes the most effective route involves working within existing structures rather than challenging them directly." "You mean accepting the board's ultimatum? Sacrificing my independence to maintain my position?" "I mean finding a compromise that preserves what matters most to you," Thomas corrected. "Your teaching has transformed this community. That impact is worth protecting, even if it requires certain concessions to convention in the short term." Before Amelia could respond, Miss Sheffield approached, smiling apologetically for the interruption. "Thomas, we should depart soon if we're to reach your ranch before the weather turns." Thomas nodded, returning his attention to Amelia. "Consider what I've said, Miss Hayes. Despite our differences, I believe your presence here is valuable. With a formal nod, he rejoined his fiancée, and they departed shortly thereafter. As the evening concluded, Amelia found herself walking home beside Daniel, the night crisp and clear, with stars blazing overhead in the Wyoming sky. "What did Blackwell want?" Daniel asked eventually, curiosity evidently overcoming his reluctance to pry. Amelia considered how to characterize the strange conversation. "I believe, in his own way, he was offering advice on navigating the board's ultimatum." Advice from the man who created the situation in the first place? Daniel's skepticism was evident in his tone. It was more nuanced than I expected. Amelia admitted, "He seems to genuinely value my contribution to the school, even while maintaining traditional views about propriety." They walked in thoughtful silence for several moments before Daniel spoke again. "And have you reached a decision about how to proceed?" Amelia stopped walking, turning to face him beneath the starlit sky. "I have. I intend to address the board directly at their next meeting. I'll make it clear that my personal arrangements have no bearing on my professional capabilities, and that forcing a choice between my independence and my position is both unjust and harmful to the community's children." A smile spread across Daniel's face, admiration evident in his expression. "They won't know what hit them." "Perhaps not," Amelia agreed with a small smile of her own. "But they'll understand exactly what they stand to lose if they persist in this outdated thinking." Daniel's expression grew more serious. "And if they maintain their position, if they force you to choose?" Amelia had considered this possibility extensively over the past 24 hours. "Then I will choose my principles," she said quietly but firmly. "Not because I value teaching these children any less, but because compromising fundamental beliefs rarely leads to lasting happiness or true acceptance." Daniel studied her face in the starlight, something like wonder in his expression. "You are truly remarkable, Amelia Hayes." "I am merely being true to myself," she replied. "Something you've always encouraged. From our very first meeting." They had reached her apartment building. On the doorstep, Daniel took her gloved hand in his. "Whatever happens with the board, know that my feelings for you are entirely separate from these circumstances. They existed before this ultimatum and will remain regardless of its outcome." The simple declaration, offered without pressure or expectation, touched Amelia deeply. "As will mine for you," she acknowledged softly. In the silent, star-filled night, with the promise of Christmas in the air and the future uncertain but full of possibility, Amelia recognized a fundamental truth. Being rejected for speaking her mind had not been a loss, but a liberation. It had led her not to the safe, conventional life she had thought she wanted, but to a bolder existence defined by her own choices rather than others' expectations. And in Daniel Grant, she had found not merely an ally or potential husband, but something far more precious. A true partner who valued her mind as much as her heart, who saw her outspokenness not as a flaw to be tolerated, but as a strength to be cherished. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as she had always faced life's difficulties, with clear eyes, an honest voice, and the courage to stand firm in her convictions. No longer a mail-order bride rejected for being too outspoken, but a woman who had finally found her true place in the world, and someone who truly valued her for exactly who she was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.